Hello everyone, Hyper here. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at all of the Death Knight Azerite traits that have been added to the BFA beta so far. I will not be talking about the general traits that are either available through zones or the ones that are very general and are available through a bunch of the classes, but rather I will just be talking about the Death Knight specific ones and then all three of the spec specific ones. Before we jump into that, let's take a look at the Azerite system because some of you might not be familiar with it. On the screen here, I have my character sheet pulled up, and you can see that my helm, my shoulder, and my chest piece are all three Azerite pieces, and this is the way it will be throughout the expansion. The way the system works currently is that based on what level your Heart of Azeroth, so your necklace is, you're able to unlock more tiers. So as you can see, I have my headpiece open here, which is 325 eye level, and this requires my outer tier to have I believe it's a level 10 Azeroth power, and then the inner circle or the middle circle needs level 12, and then the center one needs level 15. As your item level goes up, this required Heart of Azeroth level also increases. And up to level 340 or eye level 340, your items will have 3 tiers on them. But once you reach eye level 340, which is Mythic Dungeon base, you can see that you gain an additional circle. So the outer circle will be the same 4 choices, but then you get a second circle added in between the utility and just general choices, where you have a choice between 3 different talents. And these Azerite traits are specific to the item piece. So this means that you can't just have one piece and then swap for example, on my DK, I would swap from Blood to Unholy. It would still have the same piece locked in. So right here, if I was to lock in Deep Cuts and then swap to Frost, this piece will still have the same exact trait on it. And if I wanted to change it to something Frost specific, which one was it here? Oh, there we go, my chest piece. So if I wanted to swap it to something that is Frost specific, then I would need to go ahead and reforge it. So that is the second part of the system. If you actually want to change up what the trait on this piece is, you have to talk to the reforger, you drop the item in there, and then you reforge it. The cost is, it starts off at 5 gold, and then every time you use this, it doubles. And then there's a decay system added where every 3 days it halves. So obviously mine right now costs 10,000 gold, and I was just kind of testing it and just kept reforging to see how much this would ramp. And currently I don't see that there's actually a ceiling. So you might want to be careful about reforging too often, because you will have to wait quite a long time for that price to decay back down. Now let's take a look at the traits themselves and see which ones have the potential to be good. Please bear in mind that when I talk about these Azerite traits, a lot of the numbers are not finished, and the numbers that you do see on the screen here are based on level 110 rather than a level 120. I will talk about which ones I think are well designed versus the ones that probably won't see much use. But again, if some of them are overtuned, even if they're not designed very well, we will still use them. And this works on the other side as well. If a trait is well designed but is undertuned, then it's not going to see much use. So in the general section here, we only really have one, and that is Runic Barrier. Anti-Magic Shell absorbs 77 additional damage, and its duration is increased to 6 seconds. So it just increases the duration by 1 second. This trait might see some use if you really need AMS to be a stronger defensive cooldown, but overall I don't see people taking this too much. Moving on to Blood. First one here is Deep Cuts. Heart Strike amplifies your Blood Plague on your primary target for 15 seconds, causing it to drain an additional 25 health each time it drains. So with this trait, I assume you will be Heart Striking a target, then tap targeting, Heart Striking, tap targeting, Heart Striking. So you might get overall quite a big benefit from it if you're able to apply this debuff to a bunch of your targets, and you get some extra healing on top of it. So overall, it's a decent trait. Then we have Marrow Blood. Death Strike heals for an additional 34 for each remaining charge of Bone Shield. I assume this will be the go-to single target trait for gaining extra healing when you're either looking at boss fights or some tyrannical bosses perhaps. The third one here is Embrace of the Dark Fallen. When Vampiric Blood expires, your leech is increased by 21 for 10 seconds. This is an especially good defensive trait for Mythic Dungeons, where Leech is much more beneficial than it is on single target. The fourth one here is Bones of the Damned. Morrowind has a chance to grant an extra charge of Bone Shield, and Bone Shield increases your armor by 39. So since we're already kind of struggling with having low rune regen and we're rune starved quite often, this trait might be pretty nice, but it would be nice to know what the chance actually is rather than just tell us that it's a chance to gain an extra Bone Shield. And then the fifth trait here, which in my opinion is the best one, Eternal Rune Weapon. Dancing Rune Weapon grants you 39 strength, and each rune spent increases its duration by 1 second, up to a maximum of 5. So if you stack 3 of these on top of each other, I'm not sure exactly how they are going to interact. Does that mean that we can actually extend it by 15 seconds? Or is this just capped at 5 overall, and we just gain the extra strength from each of the traits? So this has the potential to be good, but we'll see how it actually works out. Moving on to Frost Decay. Frozen Tempest is our first trait here. Remorseless Winter deals an additional 39 damage, and the first time Remorseless Winter deals damage to 3 different enemies, you gain Rime. So this means that whenever we run into a pack of mobs in Mythic Plus, for example, or on a raid boss if mobs happen to spawn, you press Remorseless Winter, and then right after that, you're guaranteed a Rime proc. That is pretty nice. I think for AoE, this is a pretty good Azerite trait overall. The second one here is Echoing Howl. When empowered by Rime, Howling Blast causes a secondary burst of icy wind around you that deals 216 frost damage to nearby enemies. So this again just boosts our AoE damage and boosts our Rime damage, or our Howling Blast damage, I suppose. Overall kind of boring talent, but if it is tuned properly, it can be quite a nice AoE benefit. Third one here is Decimate. Obliterate has a additional 5% chance to trigger Rime, and Obliterate deals an additional 539 damage when it critically strikes. So the key here is that it only deals additional damage when it crits. And this means that this Azerite trait will become better as the expansion goes on, because obviously at the beginning we're going to have pretty low crit percentages, and then as we get towards those later tiers, our crit is going to be quite high, and this trait will be much more beneficial for single target. The fourth trait here is Icy Citadel. When Pillar of Frost expires, your strength is increased by 99 for 6 seconds. This effect lasts 2 seconds longer for each Obliterate and Frostbite critical strike during Pillar of Frost. So again, another trait that is based on crits. And just like with Decimate, early on in the expansion, it probably won't be that beneficial because we're not going to be critting that often. But then as we get more crit, this becomes a better and better trait. The fourth trait here, or the fifth one, Latent Chill. Frost Strike deals an additional 141 damage if you have at least 3 empty runes. So this works essentially like our talents, but instead of just dealing frost damage, it just buffs our Frost Strike slightly. I'm not sure what to think about this. It's kind of a boring design, and we already have this in a talent form, so I'm not too stoked about this one. And then our last new trait here is Glacial Contagion. Your auto attacks have a chance to apply Glacial Contagion, dealing 273 frost damage over 14 seconds. Obliterate deals an additional 58 damage to targets infected with Glacial Contagion. So this is another one of those single target traits that might see use if it is properly tuned, and it will pretty much just have to compete with Decimate and the other single target trait. Moving on to Unholy DK. So Unholy has a bunch of Azerite traits. First one is Last Surprise. When your goal expires, they explode in Viscera, dealing, we don't know exactly how much yet, shadow damage to nearby enemies. And this was a trait, an artifact trait, if I remember correctly, from Legion called Portal to the Underworld, I think, where your ghouls would explode whenever they died, and this just pretty much came back as an Azerite trait. Second one here is Bone Spike. Casting, either Defile or Death and Decay, impales enemies with Bone Spike, inflicting 47 physical damage and healing you for 125 per enemy. Actually, if I noticed correctly, I think you're actually able to use this on Blood as well, but when I was putting this list together, it was listed under Unholy. So for Blood, this would make more sense, but even for Unholy, if you want some extra survivability and some self-healing, it's a decent trait. Third one here is Festering Doom. Death Coil causes your next Festering Strike to deal an additional 154 damage. And as far as I'm aware, this does not stack, so it means that you're going to want to weave your Death Coils instead of just, if you have very high amount of runic power, instead of just tossing out 2 or 3 there, you're going to have to kind of Death Coil, Festering Strike, Death Coil, Festering Strike. Now obviously you're not going to be weaving just those 2 abilities since you have other things to press, but you're never going to be casting 2 back-to-back. The fourth Azerite trait here is Horrid. When Dark Transformation expires, the Unholy energy in your goal is expelled, dealing 157 shadow damage to all nearby enemies. So this is going to be a Mythic Plus trait just for that extra AoE damage. The fifth trait here is Scourge of the Unbeliever. Clawing Shadows and Scourge Strike grants your ghoul 5 energy, and your Scourge Strike or Clawing Shadows deal an additional 231 damage. So this is a single target damage benefit, and again, depending on how it's tuned, it might be one of those traits that we will see being used for single target fights. The next trait here is Festermite, and someone actually linked me a video recently about this, and currently it's extremely overtuned, but we'll see how this actually plays out. Bursting a Festering Wound grants you 9 strength for 20 seconds, and this stacks. Stacking this effect does not extend its duration. So once you get those Festermite stacks going, you just have 20 seconds to stack up as many as possible, and then it falls off and you start over. But you're able to get an insane amount of strength if you just pull up your Festering wounds on the target, then you pull up your runes, and then you go in with Apocalypse, and then just pop as many as you can with Scourge Strike. And in the video that I was linked, the person who was testing it actually got like 7,000 strength, which is absolutely insane. The next trait here is Harrowing Decay. Death Coil inflicts the target with Harrowing Decay, dealing 156 shadow damage over 4 seconds. This is essentially just the tier bonus from Legion. Cankerous Wounds is the last new one. Festering Strike deals 154 additional damage and has 10% increased chance of applying 3 Festering Wounds. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way this is worded, I'm pretty sure it just increases your chance of applying 3 wounds to your target, which is the max, rather than applying 3 extra, because that would actually just be insane. So those are all of the artifact traits, and I assume some more will be added, some balancing and tuning will be done, but overall I think there's quite a few good ones for all 3 of the specs. In the general one, I hope they add some more defensive ones that we can use throughout all 3 of the specs, but other than that, I really like the traits that they actually added. My big issue is with the Azerite system itself, and I might make a discussion video about this in the future, but just to give you the broad strokes, first of all, it is Azerite piece specific, so if you have one piece, you have to reforge it if you want to change up the trait on it. So this means that you're going to have duplicate pieces if you're playing multiple specs, which is a system that they actually try to move away from whenever they make tier sets actually update dynamically based on your spec. Because if you remember, before that, you used to have a Frost DK set, then an Unholy DK set, then a Blood DK set. Then after those changes, you just had one set that changed dynamically based on what you were playing. I really hope that they apply the same logic to the Azerite system. And the second thing is the actual reforging. If they want this system to stay the same, so they're not going to be adding that dynamic change to it, then they need to cut down on reforging costs or add a cap to it. Because like I showed you at the beginning of the video, I ramped up my reforging to 10,000 gold pretty quickly. And if you think about it, if you're doing raids and then mythic dungeons or PvP, and you like to participate in a variety of content, that cost will ramp up quickly if you don't have a bunch of duplicate pieces. Thanks for watching this video, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the section below. And if you have any ideas for some potential Azerite traits or how they should be changed, you can also leave that there. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and sub to the channel. And if you'd like to support it directly, then you can check out my Patreon, which is linked in the description box. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one.